started here, I'm going to remind everybody one more time, please turn your cell phones off or put them on vibrate so we don't get interrupted. Also, if you are speaking, be aware we are on being broadcast across the web under for video and audio. So please speak into a microphone if you are addressing the board, and also for the board members, please remember to use your mics. So with that, I'm going to call the meeting to order. And we're going to start off with item A on our agenda. Christine, would you please call roll for me, please, ma'am? Here.
Norman Anderson.
Here.
George Crawford.
Here.
Alan Price. W. Gerald Harris.
Here.
Bill Pittenberry.
Here.
Ryan Lynn.
Here.
Naomi Doyle. Stuart Nestor.
Here.
Dan Lancaster.
Here.
Mark Thompson. And Richard West.
Here.
Okay, looks like we do have a quorum. With that, I think we're going to move on to item C, approval of the minutes. Has the board members had a chance to read the minutes?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I will entertain a motion and second for adoption of the minutes.
For the record, Gerald Harris, I so move.
Shannon Nestor, for the record, I second.
Okay, thank you. With everybody having a chance to review them, does anybody have any corrections for the minutes for discussion? No? Hearing none, I'll go ahead and call for a vote. All in favor of adopting the minutes?
Aye.
Opposed? Not voting? Thank you. We're going to go ahead and move on with public comments. Now, before I get into public comments with item D of the agenda, it appears we have several public comments here. 1, 2. I have 6 different people wanting to make public comments, and I've got these in no special orders, just however they were laid up here in front of me. Because we have 6, I'm going to limit your public comments to 3 minutes each. So please be advised that when you come up to address the board, please keep it within 3 minutes, okay? Christine, can you keep a watch on the clock for us?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So my first one is going to be Mr. Ned Pawlowski. Did I pronounce that right?
Bonskowski.
Please have a seat up there, sir. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Chair Trout, and members of the Board of Boiler Rules. Thank you for allowing me the time to address you today. My name is Ned Bonskowski, and I'm Senior Director of Regulatory Policy for Vistra Energy. Vistra Energy is the parent company of Luminant, which is the largest power generation company in Texas. And Luminant filed comments regarding item G on today's agenda on November 5th. And I'm here today to highlight some of the concerns that Luminant laid out in those comments, as well as provide what we believe is some important context for your consideration. For background, Luminant owns and operates more than 18,000 megawatts of generating capacity here in Texas, the vast majority of which is steam-driven. We anticipate that in 2018 we'll produce about 86 million megawatt hours, which is about 23% of the electricity that is projected for the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, or ERCOT region, and that covers about 90% of the state of Texas. So we are a significant player in the market. Electricity generators in ERCOT have to vie for dispatch based primarily on cost, and it is a fiercely cost-competitive wholesale electricity market that we have to compete in, and ERCOT is one of the most cost-competitive electricity markets in the world. So cost minimization and operational flexibility are key criteria for success in that market, which ultimately translates into lower cost and better reliability for the end-use electricity consumers in Texas. Safety and maintenance are also critical to success in this market, because ERCOT is what's called an energy-only market, which means that generators only make money when we run and are called upon to generate electricity. Furthermore, unit availability is of particular importance in the ERCOT market at this time. I don't know if anyone in the membership here follows the ERCOT market very closely, but just yesterday they released their capacity, demand, and reserves report, which outlines their summer reliability expectations for the next 5 years. And for 2019, they show an expected reserve margin of about 8%, which is the lowest that it has been in our COT history. In such market conditions, it is absolutely critical that generators take any and all actions to ensure their continued availability to meet the power demands of our growing state. With that context, I hope that the board can understand Luminant's concerns with the proposed changes in Section 65.64 regarding the extension of intervals between internal inspections. As a threshold matter, Luminant believes that the existing language is already sufficiently clear and provides an appropriate amount of flexibility to affected and interested parties. In the competitive power market that Luminant operates in, the ability to optimize the timing and duration of outages required for internal inspections is very important to making sure that our units are available when needed and costs are minimized, both for Luminant and for the grid operator. And those are costs that ultimately are paid by the Texas electric customers. Furthermore, Luminant has not identified any specific safety concerns that the proposed revisions to Section 65.64 would remedy, and as such,
Aye.
Luminant does not believe that any changes are necessary at this time. Am I good on time?
You're about out of time,
About
sir.
it? Okay. Well, rather than repeat our filed comments, I'll just lay out that they hit on 3 high-level categories. One is retention of avenues for short-term rectification of any identified issues in order to support continued operation for reliability purposes. 2 is retention of appropriate timelines to support state review and discussion with regulated entities. And 3 is harmonization of proposed new language with other regulatory requirements and treatments. And I ask that the board please take into consideration Luminant's filed comments when either taking any action on this matter or consider tabling for further discussions to make those changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Oh, next we have Mr. Chris Hackett.
I'd like to thank the board for allowing me to comment on this matter. My name is Chris Hackett. I'm a PE in the state of Texas. I'm a subject matter expert for XL Energy and the SPS market in northern Texas. We are not direct competitors with the previous speaker. We're in the SPP market, which covers the remaining portion of Texas that ERCOT does not cover. We also would like to express our concern with the changes made to 6564, as well as the change made to 65.2. By adding a definition to out of service of a boiler, we are potentially creating a lot of excess work that XL Energy does not see as safety concerns or eliminating any kind of safety problems we have now. We'd also like to the notification of the state for 10 days, excess of 10 days for our outages. We do not see this as anything that the state would further our, I apologize, I lost myself. I'm sorry. I'm new to this. From XL Energy, we operate 18 units in the state of Texas. We file for exemptions almost on a yearly basis for all of those units. We do internal inspections at any given chance that we're allowed to so that our equipment remains safe and is operated on a regular and routine basis. At this point, we do not see the alterations of this rule being beneficial to the state or to the company of XL Energy. We would like to either continue operating as is or potentially see an exemption for utility-sized boilers from the requirements for extension. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next one I have is a Galen Suttereth. Did I say that right?
You did.
Good afternoon. My name is Galen Sutterth. I also work for XL Energy. I'm a principal engineer responsible for our repair program. I would also like to thank the board for the opportunity to sit before you and speak today. While like my colleague said, we are opposed to the changes of the 6564. We don't feel that it adds to the safety or reliability of the boiler, as the current language is adequate. The main concern that we have is the definition of standby, the new definitions, and my colleague was referring to those earlier. We operate in reserve shutdown. We're a market-driven, so we're dispatched. We do drain the boiler. We do water chemistry. We do maintain our boilers. Our main goal is safety and reliability. We're power generation too. And we also agree with the comments previously stated. We would ask the board to consider leaving the verbiage as is. We're really concerned about our ability to obtain an extension for an internal inspection, just mainly because of the market conditions that we operate within. We are on reserve shutdown for a long time, and a lot of times, if the market does not call for us, we may be on day 9 of the 10-day limit, and we will not know until we are going to be dispatched until close of business that day. So, once again, I just ask the board to consider leaving the verbiage as is, and we think that it's adequate as written. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next one I have is Mr. Andrew Screwbar.
Andrew Schubar, Lower Colorado River Authority here in Central Texas. And yes, I'm a power provider also. You know, time is money, and we can't afford to do a lot of things with all the budget constraints that we have and everything. And thank the board for letting me allow to speak. And I guess thank you, Chief, for allowing me to be on the task committee. I would be repeating the same things these other companies are if I wasn't on the task committee to help kind of interpret this the way I think your intention is moving forward. You know, basically I had the same questions. I heard comments that it's a lot of definition out there that don't make any sense. Well, I think on the task committee we thought that that's going to help everybody understand it a little better. The only thing I guess that I would disagree with overall is, you know, why do we have to do the internal inspection every year? We just never interpreted it like that. If that's the way it's interpreted now, I thought that the rules that the way they're written helps everybody, where you're not trying to force this down, but you know, you're going to expect that internal inspection, you know, on an extension year, you know, every year. So, but that said, I don't have any further comments. You know, of course, we're concerned. You know, like I said, I'm not going to just keep repeating what everybody said. I gave a presentation to the board before when this first came up, and so I think some of the rules, the way it's proposed now, is actually helping. It helped me understand. They don't. What were the concerns out there, we're trying to settle that down. So I just thought I would just add that. No further comments.
Okay, thank you, sir. Our next comment is from one of our board members, Mr. Dan Lancaster.
Hi, my name is Dan Lancaster. I'm a PE in Texas. I represent AEP and SWEPCO. I was on the task group. I'm on the board and represent the owner-operators and of the boilers in Texas. And there is some confusion in about how they interpret these new rules, and there's a lot of concern. One of the concerns that I have is that we are a regulated utility in the state of Texas, and there's people within my company that I'm not allowed to speak to about outages. When the unit's planned to come down, when it's down, when it's coming back up, and if any of this outage information becomes public record, that would be in direct conflict with our internal rules.
Okay. Is that it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. And appears our last one is Miss Jessica Cooper.
All right, mine is short. Good afternoon, board and staff. Thank you for allowing me to comment today. My name is Jessica Cooper. I am the Texas In-Service Inspector Supervisor for Hartford Steam Boiler, and we are an authorized insurance agency. We conduct in-service inspections in accordance with the regulations as they relate to our duties as an AIA. We believe that the changes proposed in Chapter 65 regarding extensions provide additional clarity, enable consistency, and improve the ability of the board to meet its goals. We therefore support the proposed changes to paragraph 65-64, extension of interval between internal inspections. No further comment.
Thank you, Jessica.
You're welcome.
Okay, with that being all the public comments, I'm going to go ahead and move into item E on our agenda, staff reports. And we're going to start off with Ms. Tarsha Red with licensing.
Good morning. Well, good afternoon. As you can see on the report, there's not any huge changes in the population for the boiler program. The number of authorized inspection agencies has pretty much remained steady. We've had a couple of new agencies to come on board in the last couple of years. The number of inspectors, there is an increase in inspectors, not a dramatic increase, but a lot of inspectors either left the boiler inspection field, or they just stopped doing the in-service inspections in the state of Texas and still remain, and then have come back on board. The amount of equipment has pretty much remained steady. The only real difference from our last meeting and this one is the number of registered objects. And it appears that there's a big jump from fiscal year 18 to 19, but really that's just a difference in the timing of when we had our last meeting. So it doesn't give the full number for all of fiscal year 18 as we have in the other ones. Any questions? All right,
Ms.
thank
Red.
you.
So moving on to customer service, we have Ms. Irma Mendoza.
Good afternoon. My name is Irma Mendoza. I'm the Customer Service Manager for the boiler program. You do have the report in front of you. The statistics are pretty basic, the same from previous years and months. So if you have any questions, I can answer.
Board have any questions for Ms. Mendoza? Thank you.
Good, thank you.
We'll move on over to Enforcement Division, Mr. John Matlock.
Good afternoon, board members. Again, my name is John Medlock. I'm a prosecutor with the Enforcement Division. Don't have any case information for you per se, but I will kind of let you know on our next report we will have a case to talk about. It's going to be an agreed order. It's currently sitting with our executive director for signature on the final sign-off. But basically, it was a lot of our cases that we come now are either failure to pay on invoice fees, or in this case, like this agreed order is going to, I'll describe further, it was operating under a red tag. And we actually were going to schedule to go to hearing on it. It would have been one of the first boiler cases to actually go before the State Office of Administrative Hearings, at least since I've been here in the 5 years that I've been here. But when we got to the actual hearing date, sometimes as happens, respondents see the gravity of what's about to happen, and it kind of, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and settle that case. And that's what ended up happening. But we'll get into that further in our next report. But the statistics we have the last 2 years, fiscal years, I mean, from 2018, and then what we have currently through our fiscal year of 19, which started in September. Last year, as you can see, we opened 11 cases, resolved 9 of them. The way we can kind of resolve cases, if you remember, is we can either informally solve it. A lot of times, like I said, these were those failure to pay on invoices back from inspections. And so basically what we're trying to do is to get those people to come into compliance and pay those back fees on those invoices, and then we just settle the case that way. No need to go further with any kind of penalty because, that's been resolved. as you can see right now, we've haven't opened up any new cases this fiscal year yet, but I don't see that we won't. We probably will open a few more cases. Just depends on kind of what some of the inspectors see, whether or not people are paying their invoices or not. But that's kind of what is going on right now. If you guys have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Questions? No, thank you, Mr.
Thanks.
Miller. So that'll bring us into Education Examination Division. Mr. Ray Pizarro.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm Ray Pizarro, Director for the Education Examination Division. Last examination review committee we had was this past summer, and we reviewed 183 items, deleted 30, edited 58, and wrote 18 new items. As of September 1, we've added portable boiler items to the examination, and those have been cast. They're being cast now as of September 1. As you can see in the stats, we have not cast an exam yet. Your program, as you know, is a small program. There's not many folks who are testing, but rest assured, we, as of 2018, as we continue to grow as an agency, we administer at least 67,000 exams a year. So they're busy over at PSI. But for the boiler items, we're going to keep an eye on how those items are going to be performing in the future on the boiler, on the portable boiler items, and we'll report back to you on those. That's all I have.
Any questions? Thank you, Ray.
Yep.
So that'll bring us to the Regulatory Program Management Division. Ms. Karen Berryman.
Good afternoon, board members. My name is Karen Berryman. Until very recently, was with the Regulatory Program Management Division. I'll go into a little bit more about that in a moment, but if you'll bear with me, I do have an updated division report to pass out to you. Okay, so first thing I would like to talk with you about this afternoon is organizational changes. As noted on the report, our Deputy Inspector Robert Shirley retired effective October 31st of this year, and his position in the Dallas-Fort Worth area will be posted soon to get that filled. Next is a little item about me. I have recently moved to the executive office and will be the executive assistant to Deputy Executive Director Carla James. That was effective on November 15th of this year. I'd just like to take a quick moment to say I've really enjoyed working with the boiler program and with the board, and I appreciate Rob bringing me on board with TDLR, and he and Lee Parham gave me a lot of opportunities to do some things that I've really appreciated, and I'm going to miss working with the boiler board and the boiler program. Next item, inspection specialist Luis Ponce has accepted a position as manager technical services at the National Board of Boiler and Pressure Vessel Inspectors. Luis has been with the state of Texas for 15 years. 4 years as a deputy inspector, 9 years as an inspection specialist, and 2 years even as a chief boiler inspector prior to Rob's tenure as chief. Luis's last day with TDLR will be January 31st of 2019, and his position will also be posted soon. With regard to public outreach efforts since the last board meeting, Chief Trout attended the NBIC code meeting the week of July 16th, the ASME code week the week of July 30th, another ASME code week the week of November 12th of this year, and both Rob and team lead Keith Sanford attended the National Board's R Team Leader School just the end of November. Keith Sanford also provided process and safety training for the West Texas Boiler Safety Association in Lubbock on October 19th of this year, and there were approximately 60 people in attendance for that. Also, we'd like to make you aware that a new permitting module has been added to Jurisdiction Online, which is the boiler program's database. It went live for use by internal staff on October 29th of this year, and it allows for input of the following submittals. They go directly into JO for invoicing purposes and for varying levels of processing. That included the boiler installation reports and the temporary operating permit applications, extension requests, variance requests, restamping requests, and joint review invoice requests. The ultimate goal for this is that the regulated community will actually be able to submit all of these forms and requests electronically via the JO portal. And this is currently under development, and it's hoped that that will be able to come online in May of 2019. With regard to inspection statistics since the last meeting, want to make you aware of a few things. The average number of monthly boiler inspections has been on the increase over the last year. The total number of overdue boilers has increased slightly since mid-June of this year, but both the number and percentage of those overdues for which TDLR is responsible have decreased significantly, something we've been working hard at and are happy to report. The number of joint reviews conducted monthly has been much higher since the last report. And the number of boiler installation reports received monthly has also been higher since the last time we met, but the numbers of other forms or applications received have remained fairly steady over the last period. If you turn to look at the next page, you've got the inspection statistics there, and again, I won't go over and read numbers, but just a couple of things I'd like to point out. On that first box where it talks about all the joint reviews by location, there have been an average of 26 per month over the total reporting period listed on this page. For total extensions processed, we've averaged 177 per month since December of 2015, 2.9 variance requests processed per month over that time period, 1.2 restamping requests processed per month, 206 boiler installation reports processed per month, and 65 temporary operating permit applications processed over this approximately the last 3 years. With regard to the total number of boilers inspected, just of interest, about 2,642 per month have been inspected over the last 3 years, 712 per month by TDLR and 1,930 by the AIAs. The last thing I'd like to point out, that bottom box there regarding active boilers, we currently, or as of the date this was run on November 8th anyway, we had 53,020 active boilers in the state of Texas. 13,000 of those plus, or 25% of that total, are overseen by TDLR inspectors. And then if you look at the total overdue boilers at the date this was run, there were 1,636, 96 of which are overseen by TDLR, and at that point that was 6% of the total overdues. I'm available for any questions you may have.
Any questions? No? Thank you, Ms.
All
Behrman.
right, thank you.
And I have to say, you have done a wonderful job with the boiler program. I'm really happy for you.
Thank you. It's been an honor and a pleasure working with all of you. I appreciate it.
Oh, moving on to number 6 under item E, we have the report from Executive Office, Mr. Nick Bionis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Advisory Board members, Nick Voinis, TDLR Chief of Staff. Thank you for being here today. Again, thank you for your service. Here to kind of bring you a summary of what's been happening around the agency since you folks last met in July. As you can imagine, TDLR staff is working to prepare for the upcoming session of the Texas Legislature. This summer we completed our strategic plan and our legislative appropriations request. Both of those reports are available for viewing on tdlr.texas.gov. In our strategic plan, I will point out there is one initiative that would directly affect this program. If passed, it would remove the requirement for that a certificate of operation must be posted under glass in a conspicuous place on or near the boiler for which it is issued. And this change would provide flexibility for business owners. TDLR has also been busy participating in a bunch of recent legislative hearings. Again, all this in preparation of the next session of the legislature, which begins January the 8th. Also like to talk to you about some outreach, including your website, and update you on some traffic numbers associated with this program. Over the past 6 months, the boiler safety website had 26,022 page views. That's an average of 141 per day. Of those people accessing your site, 70% did so from a desktop compared to 30% off a mobile device. The top reasons for visiting your site, number one, law, followed by forms, rules, frequently asked questions, and exam information. In addition to your web presence, we also want to remind you that we are active on social media, and we have a presence on Facebook and Twitter, so please check it out if you'd like to keep up with TDLR news and events. We also have a group of about 4,000 subscribers that receive various email blasts pertaining to the program. And if someone's not receiving those and would like to, we'd like to encourage them to go to tdlr.texas.gov to subscribe, and they will immediately begin receiving those. I also wanted to close out by introducing our newest member of the communications team. Our public information officer, Tila Mange, is here. She's in the back of the room waving at you there. She's hit the ground running, and we're real proud to have her in a very short period of time. She's done an incredible job and very talented and a very productive member of our group. And again, like I said, we're thrilled to have her. And Mr. Chairman, that's it for my report, unless you have any questions.
Does anybody have any questions? No? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, that's going to bring us up to our next item on the agenda for item F, which is a report from the task group that, I hate to say this, but we should have talked about this one a couple of meetings ago. This is when we had the task group for the definition of a laid-up boiler. Mr. Harris, can you report on that?
I can. Our task force actually met one time, a full meeting. I think we might have had one absent person, but we did have a meeting. We discussed a lot of things, and the summary of the meeting was General Counsel finally advised us that we actually already had language appropriate for and already in our definitions, so that we really didn't need to sit down and go through the task of redefining a laid-up boiler. So at that time, it was determined that we were going to make the report, and then that our task force committee would be released from service. So at this point, there actually was no reason for us truly to come up with anything, because according to General Counsel, we already had the language in our statutes already. So.
Okay. Well, thank you, sir. With that being said, then I'll go ahead and absolve that task group, and that one will be official. So that'll move us on to item G, which is the discussion for the possible recommendation of the adoption of the proposed amendments to Chapter 65. And that brings us up to Ms. Laura Pfefferly, our General Counsel representative for the boiler program.
Good afternoon, members. We're here to, of course, talk about the rule changes to propose for the boiler rules. And we have a few changes from what was proposed based on the comments received during the comment period. The comments today, because they're not received during the comment period, we don't have to formally respond. Some of them overlap with comments received during the comment period. You can, however, consider those comments, what you've heard today, in what decision you make about the changes to go forward and propose. We have the changes that were proposed. We have a few tweaks to those. We can make a few more tweaks. We can't make drastic changes at adoption because the rule process requires that the public have notice, so we can't just throw in a lot of new things. They would have to go through a comment period and the usual procedure so that the public could have input. We can, however, do some modification on the rules, and we already have a few in mind for you to look at and possibly recommend. If there's anything in the rules that you decide you'd rather just sort of postpone it, that can, of course, go into a future rulemaking. You're not, required to propose things that you don't want to propose if you want to wait on anything in particular. If you want to make changes, this is the final opportunity to make them, though. Whatever you recommend for proposal today would be what goes to the commission, and if they agree, then they'll go ahead and approve it to be adopted. So I thought that because of the nature of the comments received during the comment period and today, that I would start by just reading the section of the rule, of the statute, that deals with extensions, which is not very long, so you won't be too bored by the end. In the statute, 755.026 is the section on extensions. And it says there, with the approval of the executive director and the inspection agency that has jurisdiction for the power boiler, the interval between internal inspections may be extended to a period not exceeding a total of 60 months. For unfired steam boilers or steam collection or liberation drums of processed steam generators, the inspection interval may be extended to the next scheduled downtime of the boiler, but not exceeding a total of 84 months for unfired steam boilers or 120 months for steam collection or liberation drums of processed steam generators. And here's the good stuff. The interval between internal inspections of a boiler may be extended only if continuous water treatment under competent and experienced supervision to control and limit corrosion and deposits has been in effect since its last internal inspection. The last internal and current external inspection of the boiler indicates that the interval may safely be extended, and accurate and complete records are available that show that since the last internal inspection, samples of boiler water have been taken or monitored at regular intervals not exceeding 24 hours of operation, and that the water condition in the boiler is satisfactorily controlled. The dates that the boiler was out of service since the last internal inspection and the reasons that the boiler was taken out of service, and the nature of the repairs made to the boiler and the reasons that those repairs were made. So this language here lays out some minimums for granting extensions, the conditions under which extensions can be granted. And it's obvious that the ultimate decision is left to the discretion of the executive director and the inspection agency with jurisdiction. So you could say there's discretion in here because it's left to those person's judgment, but there are these certain minimums here. I would point out that this does not require continuous operation. It does require continuous water treatment. It does require, when you are in operation, that you sample at least every 24 hours. It does require record keeping if you're down for repairs or whatever reason. So, there's a lot in there packed into that statute. And that's an old statute. It's been around a long, long time. So, I would agree that the rules do not repeat that, but nevertheless, that does not mean that doesn't apply. That the statute applies regardless. We can't conflict with it in the rules, but we can flesh it out. And so that is primarily what we have done in the extension rule changes, is attempt to put some criteria that are conducive to giving a consistent answer on extension requests and eliminating some of the discretion required to make decisions about them, and sort of lay it out, here's how you get an extension and here's how you don't. So I'm not going to reread the comments that were received. I do have our draft response to comment prepared. If anyone didn't get a copy of the red line rules, I believe there's a pile of them there. And the red line rules are just the changes that are going to be decided on today and recommended unless there are changes to those. They do show the changes that we are proposing to make in response to the comments. So what I'll do is I'll read the summary of the comments that we received, because we don't repeat the whole comment. We pull out the main points of the comments on the rule changes proposed, and then the draft response is something that is prepared with Rob's input, the board's input, the work group. So the answer really should not be a shock to anyone, but and it is just a draft response. We have to respond to the comments received when the rule is adopted. In the preamble to the rule, when it's adopted, it'll be published in the Texas Register, and this response to the comments will be in there. It may not look exactly like what I'm going to read today because we may be changing something, but this is the draft. This is basically what we're going to start with to respond to the comments. And again, this is a response to the written comments received during the comment period on these rules. They were proposed. There was a 30-day comment period. The end of it was November 5th. So this is a response to those written comments. If you heard comments today that are the same or similar to those, that's fine, but if you heard new ones today, you can consider those in what we respond to in here today and what changes we recommend. So I'll just sort of start with the first summarized comment and response. I'll just kind of read through, and we'll look at the rule change if there is one, and we'll just kind of walk through if that's okay with you all to do it that way. Okay. First comment was we received comments from two individuals and from the Texas Chemical Council and the Texas Oil and Gas Association commenting jointly, and from Luminant Generation Company, LLC. So the first summarized comment is from the Texas Chemical Council in Texoga. They expressed support for most of the changes to the rules, including the effort to modernize and clarify them, make them consistent, bring them into conformance with the American Society of Mechanical Engineers standards, ensure industry best practices, and for removing the requirement to submit manufacturer data reports. And the draft response is that we appreciate the expressions of support for the rule amendments and agree that they make needed beneficial improvements. No changes made in response to the comments. The next comment, also from TCC and Texoga, is that the reference to the normal operating level of water in a boiler in the definitions of out of service and standby is ambiguous as to what is considered a normal operating level, and should be modified to reflect that the normal operating level of water falls within a range and may vary between operators. So the draft response is that we agree that the normal operating level of water in a boiler on standby may fall within a range. However, a boiler is considered to be out of service when the water level is below the lowest permissible level determined by the manufacturer, and the normal operating level will typically fall above that minimum. So the definitions have been amended to more clearly identify the water level relevant to the out of service and standby conditions. And so if you have your red line rule, you can see the change we're proposing to make in those two definitions, if you all feel like that's appropriate. In out of service, it would change, and it would say a boiler is out of service when it is not in operation and its water level is below the lowest permissible level as determined by the boiler manufacturer. And so that lowest permissible level is basically the level, if you go below that, you're not operating safely, or you can damage the boiler. So that's the absolute minimum. The level, the normal operating levels, like the response says, is going to be a little bit higher than that absolute minimum. We felt like this change to the definition is not so drastic, or it's just basically clarifying. It's being more specific, identifying that absolute minimum better than it did. It did say that when the water level was at less than the normal operating level, which we know is not as precise as citing this lowest permissible level that the manufacturer allows. So, so that would be the change in response to that comment. And standby, the definition of standby. A boiler is in standby condition when it is not in operation and its water level is at least within the normal operating range. And this recognizes that, yeah, there is no one normal operating level. It does fall within a range. And so we felt like this is, again, more accurate and is going to be acceptable with what, you know, we've discussed and debated about this definition. So that is the change recommended to that definition and the out-of-service definition. Let's see. And I would note that these two definitions use the term "in operation," and there is a new definition being proposed for operation, and that definition is a boiler is in operation when the energy source is being applied to the boiler. That's all that operation captures, is if the energy source is being applied, it's in operation. So when it says, if it's out of service when it's not in operation, that means the energy source is not being applied. There are no other conditions or criteria. That would be it. So when you see that phrase, you need to remember there is a definition there. So that operation is used in those two definitions. And so the next comment is one individual in LGC, which is Luminant, commented that 6564 should not be amended as proposed, and one individual commented that the notification requirement in 6564B4 should not be imposed, which requires notification to the department of periods of time that the boiler will be out of service exceeding 10 consecutive days to support the ability to obtain an extension of the internal inspection interval. They comment that the notification will be burdensome, requires extra tracking of operation time and water levels, adds complexity to the extension process, reduces flexibility for operators, will prohibit optimizing the timing and duration of outages required for internal inspections, imposes costs, and will not provide benefits or add to the safe operation of utility boilers. The commenter stated that the market is increasingly unpredictable and dictates on short notice when units must be taken out of service and returned to service, and the length of periods out of service vary widely. The draft response to this is that Section 6564B4 imposes no requirement to notify the department of periods of time out of service and imposes no limit on their frequency or duration. Instead, the simple procedure for notification and confirmation by the department is designed to provide certainty to operators as to whether their ability to obtain extension of the inspection interval will be preserved despite lengthy periods out of service. And note that says out of service, doesn't say on standby or anything like that. That's out of service. No power applied to the boiler. Operators may disregard the notification process but will not be assured of obtaining extension of the inspection interval if periods out of service exceed 10 consecutive days. Such periods reduce confidence that a boiler is being safely operated. Because operators are required by the Act to maintain safety procedures, including continuous water treatment, even during time out of service, in order to obtain extensions, the proposed changes in 6564 impose no new operating burdens. The department is charged with creating rules to ensure the safe operation of boilers in Texas. It is obligated by law to ensure that certain safety minimums are observed, such as continuous water treatment at all times and daily sampling during operation. The department believes that the minor burden of notification to support certain extension requests is an appropriate condition to ensure that it is fulfilling its statutory obligation as well as providing certainty and efficiency to operators. And no change has been made in response to that comment. And so I'll move to the next comment. We can, have discussion on these as we go if you like, or we can wait until after I go through this, whatever you want to do. If you want me to just keep going and then,
Actually, I'd prefer you to go ahead and go through all of them, and
Okay.
then let us discuss them, and we can kind of go through them, and then also kind of take into consideration the comments made during the open discussion session.
okay, well, I'll finish running through. LGC commented with recommendations for the following changes to 6564 if the proposed amendments to the section are not withdrawn. The department's responses follow each comment, and so they're broken down, and I'm going to give the sub-comment and the response, and the next sub-comment and the response. First, add the underlined language to 6564A. Well, you can't see my underlines, but I'll tell you what it is. Violations noted during the external inspection, here's the underlined part, and not resolved to the satisfaction of the authorized inspector, and then the underline stops. That's the part that they want to add. May be cause for denial of the extension request. So it said violations noted during the external inspection may be cause for denial of the extension request. That's what it says now. They want to add violations noted during the external inspection and not resolved to the satisfaction of the authorized inspector may be cause for denial of the extension request. So the response is we agree that violations noted during the external inspection that have been properly resolved would not typically result in denial of an extension request. The approval of extension requests is dependent upon the agreement of the executive director of the department and the authorized inspection agency. So the rule's been modified to more fully reflect the requirement in the law. And so that's our third change in the rule text, and that's in 6564A5, and we proposed to add actually a little more and say violations noted during the external inspection and not resolved to the satisfaction of the executive director and the authorized inspection agency having jurisdiction for the boiler may be cause for denial of the extension request. And this may ring a bell because I just read that to you from the statute, where it says that the executive director and the inspection agency that has jurisdiction are the deciders here. So this is really just harking back to the statute that if the violations are cleared up to their satisfaction, then the extension request is likely not going to be denied. So that change is in your draft rule. And that is the third change so far. We have two changes in the definition and that. So the next comment, do not remove the requirement in 6564A to submit requests for extensions not less than 30 days before the expiration date of the certificate of operation, so that the department will have time to review and timely respond to the operator before the expiration of the current certificate. Right now, you have to request your extension 30 days ahead of time. The response is the department can review and process most extension requests in significantly less time than 30 days. Therefore, there's no value in continuing to impose the 30-day deadline on all operators. Those operators who need additional time to schedule boiler-related activities after receiving the department's response to an extension request are not prohibited from submitting such requests well in advance of the expiration of certificate of operation. So no change is being made. In other words, you can submit it 30 days ahead of time if you want to. We're not changing that. You just don't have to submit it 30 days ahead of time. So the next comment, retain the language, well, I'll read that off to you. Retain this language that's proposed to be removed from 6564A6, which reads right now, if the department denies an extension request, the boiler shall be internally inspected before the expiration of the certificate of operation unless authorized in writing to continue operation until an internal inspection can be conducted. And that last part of that sentence is being lopped off in these proposed changes, and it's they're saying they don't want that lopped off, but our proposed change is to take that out and just say, if the department denies an extension request, the boiler shall be internally inspected before the expiration of the certificate of operation. This is kind of a given that that's has to be done, but our response is the operation of a boiler is prohibited unless the boiler has qualified for a current certificate of operation. The bracketed language that's going to be removed introduces ambiguity because it is unlawful for a boiler to operate beyond the expiration of its certificate of operation. No change has been made to the rule in response to that comment. So we're going with taking that out. So let's see. The last, no, next to last, comment is add the following to 6564B to provide additional conditions under which the internal inspection interval may be extended. And then the commenter listed the statute, basically, 755.026 B2 and B3 A through C, which I had read to you when I sat down here. So they just said, they wanted to add all that to the rules. That's what's in the statute. And so the response is the statutory conditions in the Health and Safety Code, Chapter 755, for obtaining extension of the interval between internal inspections are fully applicable to all boiler operators requesting extensions and therefore need not be repeated in the boiler rules. Because the approval of extension requests is a decision made by the executive director and the inspection agency having jurisdiction, the proposed rules were crafted to supply operators with criteria under which the approval of an extension request is likely to be obtained, thus increasing certainty for boiler operators. Decisions about extension requests are invariably based on a demonstrated record of compliance with safe operational standards. No changes have been made in response to that comment, which again is just, they wanted a lot of this statutory material in the rules. We don't need to put it there. It's already applicable in the statute. The next comment is the requirement in 6564B to notify the authorized inspector of outages expected to exceed 10 days and to obtain confirmation from the department that eligibility for extensions will be maintained could compromise the confidentiality of sensitive market information. Information about plant outages is protected under ERCOT rules. Must be, ERCOT is the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. Information about plant outages is protected under ERCOT rules, must be reported to ERCOT confidentially, and ERCOT may not release the information for 60 days. Therefore, the boiler rules should provide that this information be considered critical electric infrastructure information and require that it should not be disclosed publicly for at least 60 days. And so our response is the notice provided to the department of time out of service for a boiler, if expected to exceed 10 days, would not fall under the protections provided to the reporting of expected outages required under ERCOT. Protocols that under the ERCOT protocols that are reported to ERCOT. However, because time out of service for a boiler may sometimes coincide with an expected outage that must be reported to ERCOT, and because the information may be afforded other protections under the Public Information Act, the department would be obligated to seek to protect the information from release should it receive a request for that information. The department is not authorized to independently classify information as confidential and withhold it. Instead, the procedure to protect information includes seeking a ruling from the Texas Attorney General's office as to the releasability of the information under Government Code Chapter 552, the Public Information Act. In that process, the operator would also be provided the opportunity to make arguments against release of the information. Operators are encouraged to mark and identify as confidential any information that they consider to be sensitive, proprietary, or otherwise warranting confidential treatment when submitting or reporting that information to the department or any entity. Authorized inspection agencies are required to protect the confidential information of their clients in accordance with their national board accreditation. No change has been made to the rule in response to that comment. And so essentially what it is saying is if anybody asks for that information about outages, we're not giving it out until we get a ruling from the Attorney General's office under the Public Information Act as to whether we have to give it out. And I have dealt with the Public Information Act in the past, and there are a lot of ways in the Public Information Act to protect information that's confidential. Infrastructure information, proprietary, financial, there are a number of things that can be protected when they're the information of a third party that's not the government's information. And so, and in that process, the operator would be able to submit argument as well to protect it. If they didn't want to take our word for it, you could argue that too, but it would not just be released. And so that's what that response is saying. It would not just go out. That recap of the comments and the responses is what we prepared and agreed on in response to all the written comments. So if you want to go through and look at the rule changes and consider the comments you heard today and possibly tweak further, you do need to decide whether you agree with the changes we have recommended that are new, which are those three I pointed out, the two in the definitions and that one about the decisions about the violations noted in an external inspection, that if they're corrected, that that shouldn't affect the extension request. That change in 6564A5. So those three you do need to agree on or tweak if you want to, for sure. And then if you want to make others or tweak those further or tweak anything further, we need to agree on language to recommend for adoption. So this is it. This is kind of where we have to settle on language. So I'll turn it back to you, Rob, if you want to.
Okay, thank you, Laura.
Okay.
So, we've had 6 different people make comments. We had several comments written and during the public review session. And I'm very, I want to make sure that what we do is right for everybody here, okay? So I kind of want to break down, and I'm going to kind of lead this discussion, and I want to address a lot of the things that I heard from the public comments and in the written public comments section, or the written public comments that we had, and then the public comments we've had here today. So some of the things that I wanted to, I heard that are a concern is, a couple of them is this 10 days consecutive. A couple of them is the definitions of the standby, the operation, and the out of service. So I kind of want to make sure everybody understands what the intent is and what we're doing here. So I'm going to start off with standby. So I'd ask the board to go to the definition that we have for standby. And our definition for standby is going to be: a boiler is in standby condition when it's not in operation and the water level is at least within the normal operating range, okay? So to me, that is a boiler that can be placed into operation. The water level is where it needs to be, and it can be instantly. You can put a fire in it, and you can start operating it. Bring it up slowly. You can bring it up fast as you want as an operator. If the boiler's really cold, obviously we don't want to shock the boiler, so you don't want to pour the coals to it. But you can bring it up. That boiler can be, you can put a fire in it, you can start going. Now, if that water level is not at a normal operating range, you now have to put water in that boiler, and however long it takes to fill it up, and then you put the fire in it. And not to mention, if the water, well, let me step back. Let me go back to the out of service now. So out of service is simply a boiler's out of service when it's not in operation and its water level is below the lowest permissible level as determined by the boiler manufacturer. ASME code requires boiler manufacturers to determine the lowest permissible level. That is a requirement by ASME. They say if this boiler does not have this much water in it, you can't place it into operation. You have to tell the operator what that is. That manufacturer of that boiler is required to determine that. So the next step is the definition of the operation. A boiler's in operation when it has the energy source being applied to the boiler. So in listening to everybody, it sounds like people don't understand what the definitions do. So I'm actually going to go down to 65B, and we're going to look at B states the interval between the inspection may be extended if at all times since the last internal inspection continuous water treatment has been maintained and the boiler has been in operation, or the boiler has been in standby. So if that boiler's been in standby, you can still get your extension. We're not saying that you can't get the extension. Now, the definition that we've left out of here is out of service, because that boiler has not had any water in it, or it hasn't been at the lowest level as determined by the manufacturer for that boiler to be safely operated. Now that boiler doesn't have all the water that's needed inside it, and if that boiler's been down for a while, then it should be inspected internally because it doesn't have water in it. You can actually safely gain entry into the inspection or into the water side of the boiler to conduct the inspection. Okay? That was the thought process going into that part of it. So I want to keep going here. So item 3 is the boiler was out of service for periods not exceeding 10 days. Okay, so now we're talking about the boiler being out of service. So now the water level's below. So the example I'm going to give you is a boiler tube fish mouse. It busts open, and in order to plug that tube, you got to drain the water. We understand that. We want you to still get your extension. The problem is if the boiler's completely drained, why can't you do an extension? Well, in most industrial users' case, it's my understanding that they want to get in there, make the repair, get out, and get it back up online because they're making product, whether it be electricity, petrochemical, oil, gas, whatever, okay? Well, if we're going to shut that boiler down, cool it off, get in there, plug a tube, get out and fire it back up, this 10-day rule, we can do that. That's what the thought process was. Now, we're going to go to the next line item and say number 4, if the boiler was out of service for periods exceeding 10 days, you can still get your extension. You just have to tell the department, hey, I've been down for 10 days. I'm going to go past that 10 days. Because now, that boiler's been down for 10 days. At this point, chances are that boiler, it's been down for 10 days. There's no reason that inspection agency can't go in and do that internal inspection that is required by law. Oh, another thing that I heard in here today is one of the public comments says is they want us to deregulate the industrial users. That's physically impossible. That is a legislative change. This board has no say-so over that. That has to go to legislation because the legislation in 755.025 states all boilers shall be inspected internally and externally. The next part I want to talk about is when we're talking about these inspections, the law says it has to be inspected internally and externally. The extension is only the extension of the internal inspection. That means the external inspection still has to take place. The certificate of operation is issued based off of 1 year from the expiration, or from 1 year of the external inspection. So for the extension, we still have to go back to that internal periodicity. That's kind of where we're going here. The last thing I'm going to bring up is one of the comments made is the comment of us letting this information out, that it be public knowledge, and you guys really don't want it to be public knowledge. I understand that. So the way the rule's written, it says the boiler was out of its service for a period exceeding 10 days. The owner or operator had notified the department and the authorized inspection agency in a manner described by the department in accordance with paragraph 5 that the period of time out of service was expected to exceed 10 days. So we think we're going to go down, and I actually had this happen not too long ago. A company called me up and said, Rob, I'm going to be down for 10 days. And the standing rule prior to any of these rules even being thought up was if we shut the boiler down more than 7 days, that we have to do the internal inspection. And the whole purpose of that was, as the department thought, if the boiler's down for 7 days, that gives ample time for that boiler to cool down, it to be drained, and an inspector to able to safely conduct the required, by statutory requirement, the internal inspection. We're moving it out to 10 days. And then we're saying you can still get it if you just send us an email and say, hey, we ran into a problem making this repair. We think we're only gonna be down, say, 11 or 12 days. And all of this is a reply from the department to the email saying, okay, no problem, you're still eligible for your extension. And then you just show that email to your inspector when they come out to do the inspection. And they know. I can tell you right now, in my opinion, if a boiler is gonna be down and the water level is gonna be lower than the lowest permissible allowed, that boiler, if it's gonna be down for 30 days, there's no reason that boiler can't get an internal inspection. There's no reason an inspector from any one of the inspection agencies can't send an inspector out there and safely perform the internal inspection as required by law. The reason I wanted to do this is because right now, there is very little actual statements as to what you have to do to get an extension. If I were to go by the letter of the law right now, if the boiler shut down because it fish mouthed the tube and your boiler was drained to plug those tubes, and that plugging process took more than 24 hours, by letter of the law, that boiler would not be eligible for an extension because you did not do a water treatment sample during that 24-hour period. By incorporating these rules, we're understanding that when a boiler is in operation and we're doing water treatment, we're maintaining corrosion and chemical buildup or scale buildup. When the boiler's in standby, we're acknowledging that boiler's not in operation, it's not causing pitting of the boilers, it's not causing that scale buildup inside of the boiler. And that's what that's what the task group was trying to do. With that, I'm gonna shut up and I'm gonna let the other board members kind of talk and let's see what everybody thinks and see what we can do here. So, anybody got a comment?
Rob, Shannon Nesser from CNA Insurance. I think fundamentally, from an insurance inspection standpoint, and I appreciate HSB's response to this, we believe in internal inspection. Fundamentally, we believe in internal inspection. It's written in a national board code. It's adopted in all jurisdictions. And I think exemptions or extensions are an avenue to provide relief in situations where it can't be done. So I think clarification of the rules in this particular case and the intention of the task force was to make it easier for the department to understand the circumstances and apply extensions. It isn't to get out of an internal inspection. As an insurer of equipment, we want to ensure that it complies, that it's safe to operate. We don't disrespect your opinion of that. We appreciate your opinion. You're engineers, you're operating it, you have a business to conduct. But we still believe that inspection needs to occur. And extensions may be granted and necessary, of course, but we're clarifying where those extensions occur or are given.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Dan Lancaster, SWEPCO. There was, Laura talked about the statute, and I see a little ambiguity or circular logic, I guess is what I would think here, that it talks about continuous water treatment, and that requires every 24 hours of operation. Operation is energy applied, and but if we drain it, it's not in operation. There's no way to do water treatment.
No, continuous water treatment doesn't require sampling every 24 hours. It does require in the statute that you sample every 24 hours when you're in operation. But continuous water treatment is all the time.
And we're defining operation as energy applied. And it's not the energy isn't applied, so there's no water treatment. If there's no water, there's no way to take a sample.
Well,
and there's no degradation of the unit. So I see a little.
Well, my understanding is that even when the water is drained, that your continuous water treatment program, which is defined in there as a program of continuous water treatment, accounts for even times when it is drained. and we've made the comparison to a swimming pool. You know, the pool may be full or empty, but your continuous water treatment is a program that accounts for whatever condition that pool is in over time. And even though it may be drained, you're still paying attention to corrosion and buildup and all of that. Now, Rob can probably explain this better than me because you know, I'm a lawyer. I don't know boilers so well, but he does. And I think you're seeing that it appears to be a conflict, but the statute does not require you to be in operation at all times in order to get an extension. When you are in operation, that's when you've got to be sampling.
Oh, I kind of want to expand on that a little bit. That's a good point, Dan. So the way the law reads right now, 755.026, it says accurate and complete records are available that show since the last internal inspection, samples of the boiler water have been taken or monitored at regular intervals not exceeding 24 hours of operation, and that the water condition in the boiler has been satisfactorily controlled. And the dates the boiler was out of service since the last internal inspection and reasons that the boiler was taken out of service, and the nature of the repairs made to the boiler and the reason the repairs were made. But a little bit before that, let me see where I'm looking for here. It says continuous water treatment under competent and experienced supervision to control and limit corrosion deposits have been in effect since the last internal inspection. So the purpose of the water treatment and the samples is to prevent corrosion and deposits. And that's what I was talking about earlier. So if that boiler's in operation, Dan, you made the comment that we have a proposal of standby and in operation. We're saying that the boiler's in operation and it has a power source applied to it. So I guess my question is, I don't understand where the ambiguity comes from, because we're defining what it is, and now we're saying that if it's not in operation, you don't have to do the water treatment.
Well,
So I think we're just spelling it out and making it perfectly clear. That's my opinion.
okay, well,
Sorry.
in the task group, we discussed what was out of service and what was in service and what's in standby. But a unit that's drained, you can't take water treatment samples. But she indicated that it has to be done every 24 hours of operation. And then we come in and define operation as energy applied. Well, the energy's not being applied, so it's not in operation. So if it's drained, my point is that a lot of these boilers are making money and they're ready to operate even though they're empty. It only takes me a few minutes to fill it. And I know what the water treatment is because there is no water, so there's no water sample being done. Same in standby.
So
Once it's filled, I know what it's filled with, and we take a sample and it sits there and it's ready to purge and go.
Okay, so your boiler's completely void of water. That's what you're saying, right?
So that's where we're wanting to go, is if we're gonna be in standby for a certain number of months, we want that boiler dry and ready to go.
Okay, so are you putting a nitrogen blanket on it?
Yes.
So you have to purge the nitrogen, fill it with water, and then bring it online. How long what's that take?
Not long.
What's not
It depends
long?
on which unit and where it is and
The
where the
problem,
operators are, but we've got some units that aren't, there's operating staff isn't there.
so the problem I have here is the law states
Okay.
that you have to have an internal and external inspection every 12 months, every year, right?
Right.
So if there's no water in it, why is there a problem for an inspector not to go in and do that required inspection?
If it's under nitrogen purge, you can't open it up. Now you've got to purge the nitrogen.
Granted, but the boiler's empty. So how long is this boiler gonna be under this nitrogen purge and standby?
So it's available to dispatch. If it's available to dispatch, the doors are closed. And we're making money and it's ready to go. If a unit trips, it's ready to be put online. If you kick the doors in and purge all the nitrogen out, then it's unavailable. It's in outage.
As an inspector and an operator in the industry I've been, anytime a boiler was under a nitrogen blanket, it wasn't in standby. That boiler was, it was down and we took it out of service and it wasn't coming back until we planned it to come back in, say next year or 2 years from now or whatever we were doing with it. That's my experience with it. Well, anybody else
Chief?
have any comments?
Still gotta be filled with water at some point, so is it technically standby if it's empty?
Sorry, George, can you?
George Crawford, being empty, no water, what fill time are we looking at? Average? Yeah. If it's on nitrogen blanket, you still have to fill it full of water before it's considered standby. According to our definitions. So technically, just because I would say they call it standby or ready to run, it's technically, in boiler terms, it's not ready to run. It's still in standby. It's out of commission, or it's not in a standby condition if it's empty.
And that's his concern, because
Right.
now he's got to, before he can put it in operation, he's got to do an internal inspection.
So a lot of the units are on down not required, and they have 6 hours or 12 hours or 15 hours or 24 hours to get online. So depending on where the unit is, what kind of unit it is, it's down not required. It's not in outage. It's not in standby. It's ready to run.
So the boiler can be, the boiler can be down for the last 6 months. It's been on a nitrogen blanket, and you guys get a call and you want to put it up, and the certificate of operation is good for a year. So you had an internal inspection done in January. You sealed it up, you put it on a nitrogen blanket, and in June, you got a call for it to run, right? So your certificate of operation is still good to January of the following year. Is that boiler gonna be in operation for 6 months, or are you gonna take it back down and put it in a nitrogen blanket?
It depends on whether we think it's gonna run in 2 days, 20 days, or 2 months.
Well, so I think what we're doing is we're trying to come up with a way to get out of having to apply the law. So the law is very specific in the fact that it is saying that the boiler has to be inspected internally and externally. And then the extension process of the internal inspection is just an avenue to allow manufacturers or the industrial users, because the industrial users are the only ones that use this part of the law. It's a way to allow them to continuously operate that boiler without having to shut it down. It's always been my opinion, or my interpretation, that when the boiler shut down, if it's shut down because we're not gonna operate it for 2, 3 months or 6 months or 9 months because, well, we just don't need it right now, that boiler should be prepared for an internal inspection and should comply with the law. The extension process, its intent, in my opinion, was to allow that boiler to run nonstop until we had a problem with it. We took it down, we drained it, we fixed it, we brought it back up, and we put it back online. I don't think the intent of this law, the extension process, was to allow for a boiler to sit drained of water and be able to be put up online in 24 hours with just no inspection. Because under that sense, under that premise, a boiler could be offline for 3 years and be getting an extension and never have even been placed into operation, and then all of a sudden, we're gonna go put it in operation. Or 5 years. If it's a process steam generator, it can go 9 years and never have even been looked at, just because it's had a nitrogen blanket on it.
Nobody goes that. We don't do that.
Well, but under putting the rules in that way, that's exactly what could happen. So, with my experience as an inspector, as an operator, even as overseeing fabrication of it, I can't see how it would be wise to say a boiler could be offline, drained of all water, and not have to have an inspection before it comes back online. That would be like saying, we just installed a brand new boiler And we're not gonna require a first inspection on it because it's brand new. We're not gonna do an internal inspection on it. Internal inspection and external inspection by statutory requirement is required at initial installation and every year thereafter, as required by the type of boiler, every 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years. So, anybody else have any comments?
Yes, I'd like to address the board.
Mr. West?
Richard West. And I spent 41 years with the commission, but I'm now retired and represent the public, I believe is my proper title. I struggled with this for the better part of 41 years with the previous language. Since after the first 3 years, I either went into chemical plants, refineries, or power plants almost exclusively. Some of them around the world, but an awful lot of stuff on the Houston Ship Channel. This was always a problem. You read what's in the law can't be changed. But you also are insuring this equipment. When I would go in, I wore 2 hats. One was the hat from my employer, and the other one was the hat for the state of Texas. So when we talk about boilers, high-pressure boilers, over 900 PSI, over 1,200, 1,800, 2,900, you have to give it a lot of serious thought on when you open them up, how you open them up, what you open up. One of my rationalizations, right or wrong, and you can't take my commission because it's gone, was nitrogen. Okay, how are you going to ensure the integrity of this boiler when it's in standby? You can't sample it, and we had our debates about, well, you're supposed to sample the boiler even though it's not firing. The wording has changed and evolved over time. In my attic, I've probably got 20 different versions of the rules or more. But the important thing was, how are we going to ensure the integrity and therefore the safety of that boiler? Well, the answer repeatedly was nitrogen, and you can confirm that you have nitrogen pressure on that boiler. Things evolved over time. Over the latter part of my career, we started swinging these power plants an awful lot more than we did before. Some little thing called a wind farm out in West Texas and down around Corpus Christi, and solar panels that everybody loves and is mandated. And it's rough on these plants, and it causes them to come up and down like yo-yos. They have to be available. Well, the law has not been changed. We still have that internal. But I will very rigorously sit here and tell you that I would much prefer for a boiler to be on a nitrogen blanket with or without treated water. And a lot of times they fill them up full, which is not addressed. You've got below level is designed by the manufacturer. You have normal operating, but a lot of times they'll get all the air out and fill them up full to keep air out of the boiler, or they'll put a nitrogen blanket on the top of it, because air is not good for the passivation of these boiler tubes. And so I would much prefer, as the one that was trying to make sure that these boilers operated safely, and, oh, by the way, my company didn't get an insurance claim for something, was that these boilers were on a nitrogen blanket and ready to go. Now, whether it's ERCOT or SWEPCO or whatever else thing, they have all kinds of rules now where they got to be available in 24 hours or 90 days or 3 days or stuff. And so that's what the owner users are dealing with. And it even goes whether they have black start capability. They might get paid for that or stuff. There's just all kinds of stuff that the boiler law and is not in sync with, in my opinion. But I would simply ask that we try to ensure the safety and integrity of these boilers. And if that does not mean open them up that year, because we've ensured that they're good to operate and they can get a good external and everything's in working condition, then I would think we should try to err that way. And I know we can't separate a unfired and a process steam generator and a power plant boiler, but there needs to be a way to try to keep this going and going safely. And I will offer something else. You talked about, well, if it's going to be drained, you ought to open it up and inspect it, or if it's on nitrogen. Well, then that would probably mean that maybe it only been 3 months, but they got put in a dormant period for 6 months, maybe over the winter. And it's good to drain them, so if they get some freezing weather, they don't have control problems with broken controls or something. So they probably would then decide that they have to open that boiler up, even though it just had an internal 3 months before, so that they can have it in that availability of 8 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, whatever their contract is with ERCOT or SWEPCO or whatever the other, I can't remember which ones, I get them mixed up. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. That they can meet their contractual obligations and get their money for having a boiler that they can have online when the freezing weather hits or whatever or another plant has got to come down, unexpected emergency. And so they can fill that boiler up in a shift with treated water and be up and running. But if they had that boiler open, it had air in it. The passivation's in danger. They close it up. They can put nitrogen on it. They can try to push the air out and everything. But that was worse on that boiler than blowing it dry with nitrogen, in my opinion. Thank you.
That's a good point, Richard. So with regards to flooding the boiler, or as we referred to it many times as a wet layup, I think that's pretty much covered in the definitions we have right now, because the boiler's not online and the water level is above the lowest permissible level as determined by the manufacturer. So the wet layup, it would still be considered in standby. If they were to do a nitrogen blanket on top of the water, I think that would still be in standby. It would just be the problem the thing I hear we're most concerned about is if the boiler is completely drained and a full nitrogen blanket be put on it. This is, anybody else from the board? Anybody else comments? So what's the pleasure of the board? You guys want to look at adopting it as is and then say we address something to address, bring up something to address doing a nitrogen blanket? What's y'all's pleasure? So we've heard all the comments. We've heard all the concerns. We need a motion one way or the other.
This is Dan Lancaster. I'd like to make a motion that we send it back to the task group for tweaking.
All right, do we have a second?
I'll second that. Richard West.
Okay. Any discussion? So we have a motion to send the proposed rules back to the task group for dressing or tweaking a little bit of information. If this is the case, what would happen is when it comes back from the task group, the board would have to convene again, put it out to public comment again, and then we would convene again after the results of the public comment, just to make sure everybody knows what's on the table. With that, I'll go ahead, and since there's no comments, I'll call a vote. All in favor for sending it back to the task group, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Not voting? Motion passes, so we'll send it back to the task group.
Now, you don't have to send everything back. If you want to drop out changes to a particular section or something, you can do that. If you want to adopt the definitions and, not 65, 64 changes, or, if you want to do the whole thing over, that's.
Well, the motion was to send the entire thing back.
Yeah.
So I think we need to stick with the motion, and we'll just readdress it and get the task group to discuss it again. I kind of think we addressed everything except for the completely draining it and going with a nitrogen blanket. You agree?
Right, and we did discuss that during the task group, but we didn't make much progress.
Yeah. That's good. So I'm gonna kind of step out on a limb here. I had many public comments today on this. What we've discussed here, what I'd like to know is what we're looking at doing, is this kind of in line with what you guys were talking about, or you just want to do away with it completely?
Chairman Trout.
Yes, ma'am.
So, Mary Winston, TDLR, we have to stick somewhat to the agenda, and we are being broadcast over YouTube, and we cannot call for comment from the audience. It looks like it's going back to the task group. You've had a great discussion here. There is time for these comments to get back to you. So today is not going to be that time, just because it's not on the agenda and hasn't been publicly posted. But there is time to get those comments back to you.
So then what I'll do is we will get together and we will schedule for the task group to come back in. For people that's been here and listened to the comments, if you have additional comments to what we've discussed today, I recommend you send me an email and I'll take those comments to the task group. So with that.
Rob, you might, I just wanted to point out that not all the changes have to do with extensions. One of them is that they don't have to submit the manufacturer reports, 6513. That one doesn't have to do with extensions. If you want to go ahead with the parts that don't have to do with extensions, 6513 does not, and there were a few other changes in the in 6571 where the boiler number has to be placed. There were changes there, and the in 65608 there are changes that have nothing to do with the extensions, and also 65609. So those. In 65612. If you want to go ahead with the changes that don't have to do with extensions, if you want to limit the what we're not going to adopt to 6564 and the definitions and go ahead with the other changes that aren't related, you might want to consider doing that.
And Rob, Mary Winston again, if that's something you want to do, we'll just have to follow a Robert's Rules sort of protocol. There's been a motion passage. If someone wants to make a motion to amend this, that's completely fine. Or if you want to proceed with sending it all back, that's fine as well. But as Laura said, some of it doesn't sound like there's in question. And if you want to say, let's make a motion, amending the other motion and move forward with X and Y, you can do that.
Oh, and this is I'm gonna leave this up to the committee, but I'm gonna make this statement. The motion was made, the motion passed to send it back to the task group in its entirety. With it being rules, the manufacturer's data report, I stopped requiring those to come in. As the chief inspector, I'm allowed to grant variances to rules. The reason we took that out is because it's registered with the national board and we have access to it for free from the national board. So we don't really need it. If the board wants to go over and amend that motion and go ahead and pick these back up and put it in, more than happy to do that, but it's the board's decision. So I'll need a motion from the board to do that if that's what they need to do. Otherwise, we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda.
The changes, if you want to go forward with all of the non-extension rule related changes, it basically would be all the sections that are in these red line rules except the definition section and 6564. So all the other sections you see there are not related, and if you want to approve those to go forward, those are not having to do with the
My
extensions.
concern is what we're looking at doesn't show a red line, it's all black.
Oh, well, yeah, we call them
So,
the red line, but this is just
My
the
concern would
changes.
be is that the board may or may not know exactly what they're looking at and what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm kind of hesitant to do it, but again, I'm
Okay.
going to leave it up to the board.
Well, I can list the sections if you wanted to look at that. The first big section on there, 65.2, is the definition. So you're saying you don't want to change those yet, so that whole section would be the one dropped in addition to 65.64. The rest are on the, let's see, 5th page, 65.13, 65.15, 65.63, 65.71, 65.608, 65.609, and 65.612. Those are all not related to the extensions. So you basically just be leaving out the definition section and the extension section changes. And this would be not to make any of the proposed changes or the changes we talked about today. It would just be dropping the changes to those two sections.
Mr. Trout, with that clarification, I think that I'd like to move that we actually do go ahead and pass or vote on the items that are actually not affected and have not been discussed or any comments made by the general public. And that way we'll go ahead and get on with our business and we then segregate or handle only the items that we need to really be concerned with our task force.
That's a motion?
That's a motion.
Do we have a
Shannon Nestor,
second?
CNA, I second that motion.
Okay. Okay, so we have a motion to go ahead and look at let me make sure I understand your motion here. We're looking at, is your motion to consider them or to adopt 6513, 6515, 6563, 6571, 65608, 65609, and 69612, thereby ignoring all the changes that were recommended or addressed in the extension process? Is that your motion to adopt them, or is it to us to discuss them?
It's to discuss them.
Okay. So, do we need a vote on, to discuss them?
Well, Rob, Mary Winston again, we're already doing that. And I'm assuming the request to discuss is to decide whether we want to move forward with adoption on those separately?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, it's already on the agenda to discuss. You're gonna discuss them. We got caught up in the things that were actually commented on, which is a normal thing, and we had a great discussion on those items. We do have several other items that quite possibly can move forward, and there's a request to just complete this agenda item G, discussing only the portions that don't deal with the extension, which are 65.2 and 65.64.
And I would note, these were y'all did look at these at proposal, they've been to comment, and there aren't any changes now that we're recommending. So all of those changes in these sections that you may be proposing to adopt, there are no changes at this point. So they still look just like they did when they went to proposal. We can look through them, but like I say, there's nothing new on those.
Okay. So, Mary, I just want to make sure that I do this correctly. Since our previous motion was to send everything back to the work group, do we have to reverse that motion to
We're
go into
gonna-
discuss it, or can we just reverse that part of that motion?
We're going to just amend the whole motion just for simplicity's sake. If someone would like to make a motion amending the previous motion to only withhold certain sections from adoption. And
should
name
come
those
from the
sections,
proposer.
which are 65.2 and 65.64, to go back to the task group, and the remaining sections in line item G to move forward for adoption. That's what we do.
That's,
Okay, let me see if I can do that.
okay. Thank
So I would like to amend the proposal to send back only 65.2 and 65.64 to the task group.
Do we have a second?
And I'll second the amending of my previous second, Richard West.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Not voting? Motion carries. Okay, so 65.2 and 65.64 goes back to the task group. That leaves 65, 13, 15, 63, 71, 608, 609, and 612 on the table for discussion. Laura, I would ask that you go over these items fairly quick, since we saw them before. I want to make sure that the board members know what we're going to be doing with this.
Okay. By not recommending the proposed changes in the definitions, that would also exclude the change in the we had a continuous water treatment definition. That won't be made. The out-of-service definition, the operation definition, and the standby definition would not be added. So those will just, the definition section just won't be changed. It'll remain the way it is. The new definitions won't be added. So the next section that's in your rules is 6513, and that is the requirement for the manufacturer's data report to be submitted. It's just being removed. That requirement just is coming out, and so, and there are no changes to that removal of that requirement. So that's all that 6513 does, is say that the owner or operator of a boiler in the state must submit a boiler installation report to the department within 30 days after completion of a boiler installation, and it no longer requires you to submit the report. So that is exactly the way it was at proposal, no changes. 6515, this one is, it says, to be eligible for a certificate of operation, the following requirements must be met, and then it has compliance with new boiler installation, completion and submission of the applicable inspection report, required repairs completed, and payment of the fees. And this really does not change any substantive requirements. It just kind of put them in a more understandable format, so there really is no substantive change there. And again, you've already looked at this at proposal. We're not making any changes now, so it still looks the same as it did then, and it was pretty uncontroversial then. So, and then the next section, 6563, the only change in that one is the citation to another rule in there is being corrected. It said, it referred to 6543, it's being changed to 6545. It's all that, it's the only thing in that section. 6564 is the extension section, of course, and because we won't be making the changes that we've been talking about, it's still going to look the same as it does now. And so when we modify the rule to go to adoption, if there are any citations or anything that have to be corrected because of that, of these changes not being made, I'll fix that. But 6564 will just remain as it was before we proposed any changes and sent that out to comment. The next section would be 6571, and this is just some correction of the terminology. It changes from portable or stationary non-standard to just say non-standard, and this is just in to be consistent with some terminology changes that had actually been made in the rules before, and I think this section was just missed. So this was just a wording change to be consistent with the rules, and we're not changing anything now, still the same as a proposal. 65608 had, let's see, this is another instance of correcting this wording that had already been done in some of the rules. This was another instance where we're adding under 3, each ASME code, section 1, unfired steam boiler shall have one safety valve, and if it has more than 500 square feet or 47 square meters of bare tube, we're adding bare tube, water heating surface, it shall have 2 or more safety valves. You've already seen this change happen in some of the other rules. This is just to bring this up to comply with that change elsewhere. So we're adding that bare tube in there. And then 65609, process steam generators, again, adding that bare tube words into D3. bare tube water heating surface, to be consistent with that change that's already been done in a few other sections. And then the last, 65-612, repair and alterations. It's just rewording E2, where it was kind of oddly stated, and so it was just reworded to add into A2. It says plugging boiler tubes on fire tube boilers fabricated in accordance with ASME Section 1 or 4. Best practice is not to plug a boiler tube in a fire tube boiler. If a fire tube boiler tube is plugged, the following criteria shall apply. And then it gives the list, and it takes out that part about best practice and puts it in 2 instead of in that list. So it's really just a sort of a rewording to make it a little better worded. And again, we're not changing anything. This is how it went to proposal. Y'all had already talked about it. So no new change there. So again, all of these sections I just highlighted for you there's no changes now. They look just like they did at proposal. And so if you recommend those for adoption, there's nothing different there.
All right, everybody catch that? Does anybody have a motion?
For the record, Gerald Harris, I propose that we adopt 6513, 6515, 6556, 6571, 65608, 65609, and 65612 as stated by General Counsel.
Mary Winston, there's one change. It's 6563, not 56. Is that right, Laura?
I thought he said it.
Yeah, the citation changes in 6563.
Yes.
So that one, yeah.
Okay,
And
all right.
then we'll add it to the.
Yeah, it's in there. Oh.
6560.
Do we have a second?
Brownland with the XL Insurance, I second the motion.
Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, I'll go ahead and call for a vote. All in favor of adopting those sections of Chapter 65, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Not voting? Motion carries. That brings us to item H on our agenda, recommendation for agenda items for our next meeting. Anybody have any recommendations? I'm going to recommend our item that we're sending back to our task group to go to that. That'll be one item for it. So it'll be a report from the task group on the extensions.
Is there a way to add new members to the task group since we have so much of an outpouring of personnel that wanted to join in?
Yeah, I can add some people to the task group. However, if the task group gets too big, which it's pretty big already, I don't think it'll get, I think we won't get anywhere with it. We'll just go in circles. And we do also have to take in consideration how many board members we have on them because we can't get a walking quorum going.
Correct.
So my preference would be to leave the task group as is. We do have several of the members of the task group in this room. Dan was on it, Mr. Screwbar was on it. I'd encourage them to be able to get the comments from the other people. Also, those people that have the comments, again, send me an email. My email is on our webpage, so send me your comments, and I will make sure that the task group members gets everybody's comments. Is there any other items for recommendations on the agenda for next meeting? Nope. Okay, so we'll move on to item I. Discussion for time, date, and location. So I can say the location will probably be right here as far as the time and date.
Mr. Chairman, Nick Voyne is here, TDLR.
Yes, sir.
Christine will get back with you guys and poll you and come up with a date here, probably right after the legislative session.
I would greatly appreciate that because my schedule for the next 3 months is really full. So, and yeah, the task group's got to meet as well. So we'll come back, we'll get TDLR to do it. That brings us to our next item for adjournment.
For the record, Gerald Harris, I so move.
Second,
George Crawford, I second.
we're adjourned.